If I try to run our server, you'll see we get an error. It says improperly configured, set the secret key. And it's telling us this because this is the first value it's trying to retrieve and there is no secret key. So what we need to do is we need to export this variable in our terminal. So we say export read.env file equal to true. So that will now be the environment variable that gets read over here, and it should be set to true. So then it will read our .env file and load all the environment variables into the session. So if you run now you can see that it runs perfectly fine. This is a very important step in running the project, and I'll also add it into the README as well. So now that we have environment variables configured, the next thing to do is to set up a database that is not a SQLite 3 database. You'll want to use something a little bit better for production, something like Postgres or MySQL. Any of those kind of databases work pretty well. I'm going to be setting up Postgres. Now, I recommend that you install the Postgres app. So if you just search for install Postgres, then you'll go to postgresql.org. You can go here and you can then download it for whichever operating system you're on. Now, once you install it, you should have a little icon that pops up here, which is this little elephant. And if you open Postgres, it will show you all of the databases that you have on your machine. It also comes with, at least on Mac, I'm not sure about on Windows, so you'll just have to make sure, but it's not a prerequisite or anything. It just comes with a nice little utility to actually create databases, and that's a little command line, a command that you can execute, which is create DB. So you can run this and you can give it a name. So I'll just call this DJ CRM, and then you'll see that it's executing this command, and then there it goes. Now it's been executed. And if I were to go and open my Postgres, then I can see it here on the other screen that I do have a database called DJ CRM. So with it created, we can then specify that as the database to use in the project. So we're going to go into our settings.py, and I'm going to go down to the databases setting over here. Now the engine is no longer going to be pointing to SQLite 3. Instead, this is going to point to PostgreSQL _, and we're going to use scicop G2. This is a package we're going to need to install as well. Then we need to define some other variables here. First, the name as well. So the name is the name of the database. Now you saw that I created it called DJ CRM, and we're going to want to put these in environment variables as well. So I'm going to change this to be env, and we'll call it db_name. So inside here, I'll set that to be DJ CRM. You can actually remove the quotations. So that's the first one. Then we need to specify the user, and the user is basically the user that you use to connect to the database. So we'll configure that in a second. This is going to be db user. Then we're going to have the password. So that's the password for the user to connect to the database. All right, so that's db password. Then we have the host. And in local development, this is basically just going to be your local host, but in production, this could be a full-on URL to a database that's hosted somewhere. So this will be db host. And the last one is the port. So this is going to be db port. And again, this is the port of the server that you're trying to access. So these variables are what we need to configure in our .env file. So we'll just put those there. Now again, on local development, this is just going to be localhost, and the port you can actually leave blank. It'll just use the default port, so that's okay. Now for these two variables, we're going to need to go and create a user that can actually access the database. So I'm going to open up a terminal here, and I'm going to run this PSQL command, which comes from Postgres, and it opens up a little shell that gives you access to your databases. So here you can actually list out your databases, you can connect to them, you can do all sorts of commands. And what we want to do is we want to create a user. So we're going to run create user. You can also create a database by calling create database and then give it a name. So you can do it like this as well. I just find the create db command is quite easy to do because you don't have to go inside this little session. But we've already created the database, so I'm going to create a user and I'm going to call this the DJ CRM user. And it's important to just keep track of these names that you use. So I'm going to paste that there. And we're going to assign a password to this user, and just make sure that you put a semicolon at the end because that tells Postgres that that's the end of the line. So we want to put a password of, let's say, DJCRM1234. Put that there as the password. Execute that. Now it's important to give this user access to the database. So what we do is we type grant all privileges on a database DJCRM to DJCRM user. All right, put a semicolon, and then you'll see grant. All right, so that tells us that that was executed, and now this user actually has permission to do things to the database. So I'll copy all these and add them to the template, and then I'll just get rid of all of those. So you'll have to create your own database. And with that configured, I can then just put /Q to exit out of the shell. So there we go. And now we can try and connect to the database using our new Postgres connection. But actually, before that, we need to just install the package. So we're just going to run pip install scicop g2-binary. Right. So using that package, we can then most likely run the server. And okay, cool. So that did work, but now you'll see we have 28 unapplied migrations, and that should make sense because we're using a completely new database. So we've connected to something completely different, and it doesn't have any of the schema that we've been working on. In order to continue working with it, we're going to need to run those migrations, right? So we should see all of those migrations applied. And then we would need to create a super user and do all of the stuff to create data again. So that's just something to be aware of. But now that we are using Postgres, we won't need to actually worry about the DB SQLite3 file anymore, since we won't be using that. The other good thing about this is that you can start using Postgres right now. So this should be better for your project, because if you're going to run Postgres in production, you should try and match your environment as close as possible to that in local development as well. So now that we're using Postgres in both situations, it'll be a lot better. So the last thing we need to configure before we actually deploy the project is our static file configuration. Now this is again inside our settings.py file, and if we come all the way down, you'll see that this is what we have configured for static files. And I mentioned earlier in the project that in production, you're going to want to use a service such as DigitalOcean Spaces or AWS S3 buckets to store your static files. And while that is, I would recommend the best approach, there is another way to do this, particularly with hosting static files in Python applications, and that's using a package called white noise. Now, to configure white noise, just going to come over here and we're going to search for Django white noise. So it's this link here, which we'll go to. And we can read all about configuring Django or white noise with Django. So I'm going to go to that specific section. So we'll start by installing white noise. So we'll come here, install that. And we will then freeze those requirements. All right. Then we need to add this to our middleware. So I'm going to grab this white noise middleware and we're going to scroll up and add this right here at the top. So this will allow white noise to handle some of the requests. Then we need to specify the static files storage, which is basically pointing to white noise again. I'm going to do this right down here with our static file configuration. And that's pretty much the getting started or quick start guide. But if we go to using white noise with Django, we can read more about this. First, it says we need to specify a static root, which we've defined right there. And it says, as part of deploying your application, you'll need to run manage.py collect static to put all your static files into the static root. And this is one of the concepts I briefly touched on earlier, and it's the idea that when you are basically deploying, you want to grab all your static files that could be in multiple places and bring them into one folder. So if I were to run manage.py collect static, then you'll see it says your 135 static files copied to inside this project and then static root. And you can see there's a couple things here. First, there's the admin folder, and this is all the CSS and JavaScript and everything for the Django admin. Right? Then we've got our own styles. We've got images, JavaScript, and a static files.json file. This has been configured by white noise, so it looks like it did produce some other files alongside what we had. And the way that we access those files is in the exact same way that we always have. We load static and then we just pass the static command like that. And then to enable white noise, we did that already. We put that into our middleware. And then you can add compression and caching support. So it says here white noise comes with a storage backend which automatically takes care of compressing your files and creating unique names for each version so they can be safely cached forever. To use it, just add this to your settings and you'll see that that is what happened. And then there's also some other configuration here that we can do for instructions for our CDNs, right? So if you want to use a CDN with, so let's say CloudFront, then this is how you would do it. And then we can also see how to use white noise in development. So it says in development, Django's run server automatically takes over static file handling, which is what we've seen by going to the /static URL that we can navigate through our own files. But it says in most cases it's fine. However, this means that some of the improvements that white noise makes to static file handling won't be available in development, and it opens up the possibility for differences in behavior between development and production. So again, you want to try and keep the environments as similar as possible. So you want to then try and make use of white noise in development as well. So it says you can disable Django static file handling and allow white noise to take over by simply passing the no static option to the run server command. So what that would look like is we would run python manage.py run server and say no, just grab it from here, no static, like that. Instead of having to do that, you can just pass this into the installed apps, which is, we'll basically just pass that in front of it every single time. So I'll go and do that. We'll add that into our, not a middleware, into our installed apps, right? So that'll prevent the no static or add the no static. And like that, we're now configured in terms of static files. So the next thing is to actually take this project to DigitalOcean and to deploy it using their app platform. All right, so now we're going to actually deploy the project on DigitalOcean, and we're going to use the app platform, which is a new feature brought out by DigitalOcean. And so I'm here on the apps section. I've logged in already. You're going to want to go and sign in. And we have a link in the description of this video that you can use to get some credit to help you just start with some basic projects for free. So make use of the link in the description for that. And once you're logged in, then you're going to want to go to the apps. So if I just go home, I'll show you how to get to that. So from here, you'll have this little side panel on the left. You're going to want to click on apps here under manage. And that takes you to the app platform section. Then under here, you'll get the launch your app button. So if you don't have any apps, you can just click launch your app. And then from here, you're going to want to connect your GitHub repository. So if you don't have it already connected like I do, then you'll just have to follow the prompts to connect your account. And then you can select the repository that you want to give access to. So I'll select mine and we'll click next. All right, so from here, I'm just going to give this a name, DJ CRM. I'll leave it in Frankfurt and I'll let it select the main branch. And do keep in mind that I've merged the latest code into main branch, so it should pick up everything. Then we'll allow it to auto deploy code changes. So that basically means whenever you push to the main branch, it'll redeploy. So hit next. And then we'll see here it's detected that it's a Python app. It is a web service. And from here, you can add a database, which is optional. I've already created a database beforehand just because they do take a while to configure, but I'll show you how to do that. And you'll then have the option to configure your environment variables, your build and run command. And so I'm going to hit next for now. I'm going to do this on the basic plan, and I'll select $5 per month as the container size and then launch the basic app. Now, nothing's actually going to be run because we haven't configured a build script or run script, so it should be fine for now. But what I'm going to do is show you the database on how you can set that up. So I'm just going to open the cloud in a second tab here. So underneath my project, I have a database cluster group here, which is the database that I've created. But what you're going to want to do is go to create and then click on databases. All right, so this will take you to create the new database. You'll select Postgres. You'll start at the $15 per month. And you can then, or most likely you'll want to choose the same data center. So I've gone with Frankfurt. And then after that, you can give your database a unique name. So you can put it whatever name you want there. Make sure you've selected the right project and then create a database cluster from there. Now that will start provisioning the new database, but I already have the database created just because it takes quite a while. So once it's created, you are going to get a couple prompts to specify the trusted sources that can send requests to the database. Now, I just left it as everything for now just because I don't want to get into too many of the details. So I skipped most of the settings, but so if you go to overview, then here you'll be presented with the connections details. You'll also be presented with it during the setup process, and you'll want to take these credentials and basically enter them as the database environment variables. So you have the username, you have the database host, which is a URL, the port, the database name, and then the password, which is also very important. So when you go into DigitalOcean app, the app platform here, you want to go to components, and here under environment variables, we're going to add environment variables. So we're going to add debug, which is the first one, and we're going to set that to false. We're going to add the secret key, which I'm just going to grab from here, even though you will probably want to put a different secret key. So I'll just grab that. Right, and then there's a couple other ones here. So we need DB name, DB user, DB password, DB host, and DB port. Okay, so you're going to take all of the credentials from this database and you're going to enter them in here. And once you've done that, you can then hit save. So I'm going to go and enter all of these. All right, so now I have 7 environment variables there. And you'll see that it also builds the service again. So it's going to take that entire, all those new environment variables and inject them into the build process. Now, we still haven't configured the actual run command on how to run the Django server, but at least now we do have the Django database configured. Right, so I'm just going to close this tab here. And so before we actually deploy the project, we need to add a couple settings into the Django settings file that configure the project for production. So if we go into settings.py, right here at the bottom, I'm going to basically specify these settings that are about security. So such as making sure that we're always running on HTTPS, making sure that we have a secure cookie, a secure CSRF token. And so I'm just going to copy this into the project because there's quite a few settings here. So we're just checking if we're not in debug mode, meaning we're basically in production, then you'll set all of these settings. And the first one here is the secure proxy SSL header. And you'll see that this is just checking that it's HTTPS. We're always redirecting to SSL, so that's very important. We always want to go back to HTTPS. We have a secure cookie, secure CSRF token, and a whole bunch of other settings here, which you can read more about in the Django documentation. The one that you probably should just be a little bit more concerned about is this HSTS seconds, which I've set to 1 year. Now, if you are deploying a website that has already existed for a long time, then you're going to want to start off with a very small number just to test it out, right? So if you start with something very small, which is just a couple seconds, then you can test to make sure that it's still working. But if you are deploying a new domain, then this should be fine. So these settings are what we're going to add for only to be active in production. And then we're also going to specify allowed hosts for production as well. Now, I'm going to specify this as a star value, which basically means that any host is allowed. And this is not what you want to have configured, but because we don't know the URL that it's going to be deployed on yet, I'm just going to specify it as star. And then once we do know, then I'll just manually hard code that in. But of course, if you were deploying this on your own custom domain, so if you knew what this was going to be, then you would just put, yourdomain.com. But just for now, I'm going to keep this as a star to make sure that it does work on any host. And like that, I'm going to commit this and push it to the repository and then also merge it into the master or the main branch so that it does get updated here. Now, the last thing we're also going to add here is the GUnicorn package. And this is what we use to run Python servers in production. It's basically a technology that you use to run the server. So I'm going to open up the terminal and I'm going to say pip install GUnicorn. And once you have it installed, you can then freeze this into the requirements.txt file. So you should see it over here. And basically what this lets you do is run GUnicorn and then point it towards a wsgi.py file. So you can say djcrm.wsgi and then just colon application, which is basically pointing to the application variable in here. So if you execute this, then you'll see that it starts the GUnicorn service and it is listening on the localhost port. So this is what you'll do in production. The exact command is slightly different in DigitalOcean's app platform, but we do use the GUnicorn service. So with that installed, we can then push this to the repository to have the project redeployed. So you'll see that when you merge in GitHub, so I've just merged a pull request from the deployment branch into the main branch, you'll see that it triggers the build service here, and you can watch the logs of the application, so you can actually see what happens here. Now, DigitalOcean, first, it's using what's called these build packs, and you can read more on their website about what these are, but it's basically these sort of containers where they run different commands and execute different things. And one of these here is it's injecting app environment variables. So you can see there's our environment variables for the project that are being injected. And you can see here it starts to build the app. So it's looking at the requirements.txt file. The cool thing is that because it recognizes that this is a Python app, that it has a little bit of built-in functionality for Python. So it already knows that it should look at the requirements.txt file. Instead of us having to manually configure, like in a Docker file, that it should cache the requirements.txt file, here it's looking at it by default. So there's a lot of built-in functionality from the Python build pack from DigitalOcean, but this does help us a little bit in deploying. So now it's just installing all the dependencies. And while that's installing, what I want to come back to is basically what commands we're going to run when the project is deployed. So meaning, what are the sort of checklist commands we need to execute every single time we deploy. Now there's basically two commands that we need to run whenever we deploy. And we're going to run these commands inside a bash file, which I'm going to create here. And this is going to be run server.sh. Now, typically the first thing we want to do is we want to collect all of the static files. So any changes in our static files need to be brought in. And the way that we accommodate those new changes is by collecting them into the static root. So we would then run python manage.py collect static. But if we were to run this command in the terminal, then you would see that it's going to prompt us here. It's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? And so we have to say yes, and then it will only then execute it. Now we don't want it to prompt us in production. We just want it to actually do it. So the way that we do that is by passing this no input flag on the end of this. So that way, if you execute it, it just does it. And so that's how you will collect static files in production, so that there's no sort of input required in the terminals. And once you've collected static files, you're then going to want to run python manage.py migrate. And this is so that we can make sure the production database has the correct schema applied to it according to the new migrations that we're adding. So we want to make sure that this command is run every single time. This is the most important command. After that, we would then typically run the server. So we would say manage.py run server. But because we're going to be making use of gunicorn, instead what you would typically do is you would run gunicorn and then point it to the whiskey file that you want to execute. So this would be the whiskey.py file here inside the DJ folder. Now the way that we run the gunicorn command in the DigitalOcean app platform is by running gunicorn, then --worker temp dir, and then we have to pass this folder path to dev/shm, and then only after this can we then type the path to the whiskey.py file. So we would then do djcrm.whiskey. All right, so that is the command that you will run. Looks a little bit different to the typical command. Normally you wouldn't need to include all of this, but this is just how it's done in DigitalOcean's app platform. So that's just something to take into consideration. Now, lastly, if you try to execute this file in the command line, you would typically want to do something like /run server.sh. But if you try and run this, you'll see that you get a permission denied error. And this is because this is not an executable file. So what you need to do is you need to modify it and basically give permission to make this an executable file. So on Mac, the way that you would do this is you would say chmod and then +x and then the name of the file, which is the run server.sh. So if you execute this now, if I were to run this command, well, first of all, if I tab, it already tells me, VS Code tells me that it is an executable file. And if I do execute it, then first it's going to end in an error because this temp dir is just not correct for local development. But you can see that it does go through the other commands here. So static files, then migrations, and then it does call gunicorn and just gets this error here. But the point is that in production, this is what you're going to run. And we're going to specify this file as the file to execute in the run command. With all of this configured, we can now push this to production and see what the build status looks like on the app platform. All right, there we go. So the deployment was successful. And if we take a look at the logs here, you can see here's all the initial configuration, and you can see 135 static files copied to the static root. So that's actually run by default. So you can see it. This wasn't part of the run command. This was just a pre-built configuration that it always runs collect static. And then it's looking at all these layers. So basically trying to determine if it needs to do things based on cache. And then you get the actual run command logs. So you can see 0 static files copied to static root, and then the operations to perform. And in this case, I didn't have any migrations because it had run all of them already, and they were from the previous deploy, that is. And then you get the gunicorn logs from running the server. And so you can see then it provides us with a URL. So if I click this, then here we have the built application running on a domain. So the deployment is successful. Some things to just take into consideration right now: if you try and, well, not log in, but if you try and, let's say, sign up on a new account, then you're probably going to get, then you're not going to get any kind of email, because right now, if we go to our application settings, so we go here, then we'll see the email backend that we've configured, which is actually all the way down here, email backend. You'll see it's a console backend. So even in production, it's still not going to send emails because we're not configuring it with SMTP. So that's something we'll want to do in production, is use a different backend. So right now on the site, I can go and sign up. So let's go and put in a test user. This is actually going to be the first user on the site. And if I hit sign up, then you can see now it takes us to the login page, right? Because we are signed up. And if I hit login, now we just wait, and cool. So I am logged in and I can start performing all the necessary actions. But one thing that you will notice is that the email sending will not work. And that's because, again, we have in the code, we've set the email backend to be the console, or rather to be the email backend part of the console. So that means it'll just print them out to terminal. And in production, that's not what you're going to want. You're going to want to actually send emails. So just bear in mind that when you do set up an SMTP email sender, then you're most likely going to pay or have a paying account with something like Mailgun or SendGrid or another mail provider. Another thing to bear in mind is that when you set up your own email provider, then you're going to need your own domain first. So if you don't own a domain, then I wouldn't go through this part of the tutorial because it's all about connecting to your own domain. So once you have your domain, you would then buy email hosting from normally the same place where you bought your domain. So once you own an actual domain and a mailbox, then you can use that and configure it in whichever provider you want to use. But most of them do have free trials, so or not even free trials, but just free tiers. So if you send less than a certain number or less than 100 per day or something, then it's completely free. But that's just something to keep into consideration. So I'm showing you mailgun.com because that's just what I use for transactional emails. So that would be like sending an email for password resets or other kinds of just simple transactions. This isn't for like email campaigns and marketing and that. So what I'm going to do is I already have an account, so I'm going to log in, but you're going to want to just go through the sign up process and create an account. The setup should be pretty much the same if you want to go with SendGrid or you want to go with another kind of transactional email provider. So I'm going to go and log in. Now I'm going to go and configure some settings here, and these are the settings that you're going to need to use when you configure your own email provider. The first one is going to be the email host, and this is going to be different depending on which host you go with. So it could be SendGrid or Mailgun. But when you're using Mailgun, it's going to be smtp.mailgun.org, right? So that's the host. Then you need your email host user, right? So this is going to be the user that you actually log into your email provider, and it'll be depending on what email you connect to your account. So let's say you own domain.com. That's the domain you own. When you set up Mailgun, you're going to set up a subdomain, and you're going to need to verify your domain as well. So they recommend that you go with something like mg.domain.com, and that's MG standing for Mailgun. Now, once you've configured that, by default, the email host user that they're going to give you is going to be postmaster@mg.domain.com, right? Remember, domain is whatever your domain is. But it's going to be postmaster@mg.yourdomain. Right, so that email host user is very important because that's what you log in with. And there's also a password that goes with that. So you're going to have email host password, and that's going to be an API key that I'll show you how to get. Then we're also going to define email use TLS, and this is going to be set to true. So TLS is just for secure email sending. You're going to want to make sure that that's set to true. Then there's also the email port, right? And this port is pretty much standard in most SMTP settings, which is 587, but you do want to make sure what your port is for whatever host you're using. And then you'll probably also want to define the default from email. And this is just going to be the email that you send from, right? So this can actually be your own custom email, but you just got to make sure it's obviously on your own domain. So say that this was, for example, your name at domain.com. Right, so that is going to be the from email that you send from, and you're just using the email host user to authenticate with your credentials. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to get sent from here, although in some cases it can if you don't define all the details correctly. But so this is the email you're actually going to send emails from, and you'll see that the send mail function that's built into Django does look for this variable in the settings. So if you have configured it like this, then by default, Django will use this email to send emails. So once you're logged in, then what you're going to do is you're going to go to sending on the left-hand side. You're going to go to domains, and here you're going to have a list of all the domains that you've registered in your account. So you can have more than one, and you'll just want to click on add a new domain. And then here you'll add your own domain, right? So you'll see here it says we recommend using a subdomain with Mailgun, so something like mg.mydomain.com. So make sure that you do add the subdomain, that's just recommended. And once you've then added your domain and you've configured it and verified it, then you will be able to send emails from it. So I'm just going to go back to my domains. And if I go to one of my domains here, for example, the justdjango.com domain. So once you have your domain selected at the top, then you can navigate that domain inside the panel here. And I'm going to go to domain settings. All right, so this is just all your general settings. And you can go to your DNS records and you'll see all of the records for your domain. So this is where you'll verify everything. Then you'll have your SMTP credentials, which is very important. And here you'll see is the postmaster email, which you can then use to send emails. And here you'll be able to reset the password, and that is where you'll then be shown the password for your user. So there should be, if you don't have a postmaster email here already, then you'll most likely be able to create it. So if you don't have a postmaster email here, you can just click on add new SMTP user, and then here you can say whatever email you want. So if I put matt@mg.justdjango.com, then I can use that as my email host user. And once you create the user, it'll show you the password. So that'll be the only time you can grab the password. So make sure you grab it there and then just enter it into your credentials. Now, once you have that and you've got all of these configured, then we're going to move them into our .env file because we can set these as environment variables. So we can just do environment email host, and pretty much the same thing for all of these. The port I'll also put there. So email host user, email host password, email port, and default from email. So all of these we're now going to go and add into the .env, and I'll just put it like that and put it in .template as well. Now in local development, you'll see the server still running, and that's because our debug variable is true. So none of this gets evaluated, but in production, you will get an error if you don't put these values in. So even if you just put fake details in here when you deploy it, that's fine. Just make sure that there are values for this for these variables when you do deploy. Well, that's of course if you do want to have emails sent. So I'm going to then go into my DigitalOcean app platform. I'm going to go to components, and I'm going to go to environment variables, and I will add all of these environment variables in here. with the correct values, and that'll then trigger a rebuild. But what I'll then do is push this code to the main branch so that this can then take effect. And once we have that all updated, then we can test out the password reset functionality to make sure that we are getting emails sent. One last thing is we also want to change the email backend here. So I'm going to change this to be the SMTP backend. That way we'll make sure that we actually are sending emails instead of logging them to the console. All right, so the deployment was successful, and we can view the logs for that as well. And I'll also just refresh the application here on the live domain. We can see that that still works. And to test the email functionality, I'm going to go and log out. And I want to log in as a super user so that I can add an email for my test user. So if you want to create a super user, what you can do is you can go to console, and this will open up a sort of console with the actual container of the application. So you could like list everything out, and you can see here's all the files in the application. Now what you can do is you can run manage.py, create super user, and when you do that, then we'll be prompted with all of the credentials that we need to do. So there's username. I'm going to go and put admin, email address. Cool. And then we can see super user created successfully. So I can go into over here and I can log in as that user. Cool. So now I can see I'm logged in as the admin user, and I can also go to /admin because I am an admin user, and you can see that the styling, the CSS and everything works because we're using white noise. So we do know that the static files are being hosted correctly. And I'm going to go to users, and we can see there's both of the users. So if I go to test user, then what I'm going to do is just give him an email so that I can actually test this out. Cool. So now I need to log out of here, and we'll go and reset the password. So if I go to forgot password and I enter my email address and hit reset password, then you'll see it does take a little while because it actually needs to connect to an email provider, and it did go through, so that should tell us that we should see an email. So I'm just going to go and open up my mailbox now. So there is an email coming through, and you can see here it's saying you've requested to reset your password. Please go to the following URL, enter your new password. So let's try enter new password. And there we go. Cool. So we can see that the email functionality is working, and that is exactly what we wanted to get out of this. So we do have email set up with Mailgun now, and that is pretty much everything configured in terms of setting up a project for production. So if you've come this far and you've got your own domain and you've added your own email address, then what you're going to want to do now is just put this project on your own domain, or at least a subdomain of your own personal website or portfolio site, just something that you own. And it's really easy to do that. So inside the DigitalOcean app platform, you can see this is the live app URL, but you can change this. So if you go to the app and you go to settings, then here under settings, we'll have domains, right? So under domains, just click edit, and here you can add your own domain, right? So this can either be a full domain or it can be a subdomain of one that you already own. Make sure that if you don't have a domain, I'm just going to click cancel, open up the cloud here, and this takes you back to the normal DigitalOcean cloud, the control panel. Whichever project has your database that you created, that's the project that you're going to want to add your domain to. So you can see here's the DJ CRM9 that we added, and that's under the Just Django project, which also has the justdjango.com domain. So I've already added my domain, but you can also create a domain. If you come over here, you can just click to add your own domain, and you'll just need to verify that, and by pointing the name servers to DigitalOcean. There are some tutorials and a lot of resources on how you can set up your own domain, but once you have it set up and it's pointing to DigitalOcean, then you will be able to use this domain inside the app platform. So coming back here, if I go to add my domain, I'm not going to put this on justdjango.com because that's already taken, but I am going to put it on crm.justdjango.com, which is a subdomain that I wanted to exist on. So you can see here, it's giving you the option. You can choose your DNS management, either that you point it to DigitalOcean, which is this option here. So you just take these name servers and make sure that you're pointing your domain to here. Or you can use your existing DNS and then just manage it like that. Now, I already have my domain, so I'm going to add domain here. And I already am pointing to DigitalOcean, so this should be fairly quick. And there we go. So we can see a new domain has been added. And if we click edit here, we should be able to see, there it is, crm.justdjango.com, and it's busy configuring. So once that's done configuring, which is already at 67%, then we should see it being hosted on that domain. Cool, there we go. So it does say it's active. So if I do click on this, then cool, we can see it is live on our own subdomain. And that is how we deploy a Django project using the DigitalOcean app platform. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just touch up on some things that I've found after deploying. One of them is the empty query sets here. So I'm just going to add that if the query set is empty, it'll just show that there are no leads. It's just a nice way of filling in the empty space. And also, if I go to assign an agent, I haven't used Tailwind in these forms or the crispy forms to style this. So I'm going to fix that up as well. And I'm also going to add some views to create categories, because right now we don't have any logic to do that. We were doing that in the admin. So I'm going to go and do that. First, I'm going to start off with the empty query sets. So I'm going to go to the leads app. We're going to go to templates, lead list. And in here, so you can see we have this for loop. Now, at the end of the for loop, before the end for, I'm going to add this empty sort of keyword. And basically what that does is if the query set is empty, then it will render this instead. So if there are rows, then it will loop through them and create the rows like that. Otherwise, we'll just say there are no leads in, or we can say there are currently no leads. So just something like this. And we could do the same sort of thing for the agents, so or categories as well. We could do the same thing for the agents. So if we go to agents, templates, agent list, we can do the same thing here. And we can just say there are currently no agents. Right. So that's the first thing. Next is the form, which we saw over here. When we assign an agent here, we can see this in the assign agent view. So I'm going to go to our templates, to the assign agent, and here we're going to basically just take some code from here where we load the Tailwind filters. So just load that in there, and then this we're going to change to crispy as well. And I'm also going to just grab the div, right, so that everything is a little bit more consistent. And I'll just grab the URL here. So that's already go back to leads, so that's fine. And we'll just change the text here, assign an agent, and everything's pretty much the same there. So we've got all the styling looking a little bit consistent. Cool, so that is one of the other things I wanted to take care of. And now lastly, we want to put in some views to create categories. So right now this is all in the leads app. So right down at the bottom, we have the lead category update view. And we have the category list and detail view. So I want to go and add a create view to create categories, and pretty much actually the update and delete view as well. So I'm just going to add all of those, and I'm going to take them from the lead create view first, just so we have some code to work off of. So I'm going to make it that this is only for organizers, because we don't want agents to be able to manipulate the categories. So this will be category create. So inside here, right, so I'll duplicate the lead create template and change this to be category create.html. Right, so create a new category, and this will be, go back to category list. All right, so just close that. The form will need to change, so we'll create a form, and then the get success URL will take you back to the agent list, and the form save is not going to do anything because we're just creating a category. So let's go and create a new form here, and we're going to need the category model for this. So we'll import category, and then we can just come down here, create a class. We'll call it the category model form, which is going to be a model form. Add the class meta, model is category, and the fields is just going to be the name basically. And so the server's running there, so that's fine. We'll bring category model form into our views.py, specify it as the form here. So let me import them like this. All right, so all the way at the bottom, here's our category model form, and that should work as well. So let me open up the local development here and just log in as one of the users. And let's just see, wrong password there. Yes, because I'm using Postgres, I don't have a user. So let me just create an admin user here. Well, actually, it's not really necessary. We can just sign up. So let me sign up. Cool. All right. So if I go to view categories here, we don't have any categories. So let me put a link here that says create category. So that's going to be in the category list.html. And I'll just do this right underneath here. So I'll say a tag, href is going to be a URL. And it's going to be to the leads app, to category create category. And I'll just add some class on this as well. Say hover text blue 500. And we just need to add that into the URLs. So bring the category create view into our urls.py. Right, so it's going to be pretty similar to what we've got here. I'll just change the path to be create category, right? And then use the category create view and make the name category create. And so that's fine, the server's running there. So we've got a link that takes us to that. So if we refresh here, creates a category. If I click there, it takes us here. So let's say that we want to have contacted as a category. Then, the organization is not being filled in. So actually, we will need to populate the form valid method, which is going to look very similar to this form valid method. So basically the form valid here is just responsible for assigning the organization to the category. And that's just the request user's user profile. We don't need to send an email. And just make sure that the super command calls the correct view name. So like that, if I resubmit this, then leads agent, this should be category list. Just make sure that that's correct. Category list, yep. So if we go back here, go to agents, or not agents, go to categories, leads. Right, there we have contacted, and we can go to the detail view, and that works as well. So now we'll just do an update view as well. And it's going to be very similar to this right here. So I'll just copy and paste that. This is going to be called the category update view. It's going to use the same form, but now it's an update view. The template will be the category update.html, and we can remove the form valid, and we can keep the same success URL. So then we just need to create a template, which I'm going to copy and paste off the, not the category create, the category create is fine. So off here, I'll create category update.html, and we'll say update. This is going to be the object.name. So object is the context variable, right? So that's the template, and we're specifying the template there. So now we just need to bring this into our URLs, which I'll import here. And using the category detail URL, I'm going to just go on the same convention of /update and use the category update view and put a name of category update. And like that, we can then take the name, go to category detail, and I'll just put a little link here that says update. The href is going to be a URL. I can actually just do this. All right, URL is going to be leads category update, and we just pass in the category primary key in that, and we can also pass in the class here for hovering. So if I refresh here and I click update, then let's see, it's missing a query set. So going to our category update view, we need to define the query set of categories. And this is basically going to be the same query set here, so that we filter based on the organization, right? So take that and put that there as the query set. Okay. So let me just refresh the server here. And there we go. So we can update contacted to be, maybe I misspelt it, contact, and go back to it. You know, it is supposed to be contacted. Cool. So that's updating. Lastly, we're going to want to do the delete view. So I'll just put a delete button next to the update link there, and we can go and create the category delete view. So category delete view. And again, it's going to be the organizer mixin, but it's going to have the delete view that we inherit from. Template name is going to be category delete.html, which is going to look very similar to the category update. So just update this one, category delete.html. All right, so go back to categories. And are you sure you want to delete category.name? And that form is fine. Right, so that template is done. Get success URL will be that, and get query set will be that. So same query set as the other views. Now we just take this into the URLs, and same sort of convention here. We're going to add a URL to /delete that uses the category delete view, and then name is category delete. And then we can just go to the category detail.html, and I'll just duplicate this and say delete, and the name will be category delete. And like that, we can now go test this out. So if I click to delete, are you sure you want to delete contacted? Yes, submit that. And if I want to put another one here like converted, and we can update, we can delete that. So cool, so our categories are working. We have the update, delete, and create view working, and all the other little small fixes as well. So I can now push this to the main branch, and we'll have that update the live site. And so that's really the end of this course. There's a lot that we've worked on throughout building this application, and I hope that you found it informative, and especially that you are now considering using Django in most of your projects going forward. So thanks for watching this course, and since you've made it this far, that means that you're most likely interested in taking your Django knowledge further, and so that's where I would recommend that you check out learn.justdjango.com. The link is in the description of this video, and you can use this resource to become a professional Django developer. There's a whole bunch of other courses available that teach a wide variety of concepts that are necessary to understand in becoming a full stack Django developer. So again, if you're interested in that, then check out learn.justdjango. And other than that, thanks for watching this course, and I hope to see you in another video.